Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Same amount of time as his father. Anyway, he did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel. He cast metal images for the worship of Baal. He offered sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom, even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. It says even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. Let's read the note there. Could be read as even making his sons pass through the fire. Now that definitely doesn't sound as harsh, but either way, it was a ritual from another people group who worshipped another god. Therefore, it was still bad in God's eyes. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. I was sick for a little while, so don't be surprised if some of my videos sound like that. Not just this Bible study and the previous one, but there's even some other gaming videos coming up where I was a little sick. But anyway, welcome back to our Bible study. Okay. We're at 2 Chronicles 28 now. Last chapter was short, but I guess maybe that's because the king mentioned in the last chapter, Jotham, was relatively good. Maybe not the absolute best at leading the rest of the people of Judah to worship God, but he himself definitely worshipped the Lord and did good things. And that's kind of, I guess the past couple of kings, you could say, have been trending a little bit upward in terms of their devotion to the Lord. Because, Jotham was all around pretty good. His father Uzziah was mostly good, kind of did one thing that wasn't so great later on in his life. And then before him, his father, whose name I am blanking on at the moment, he, started off good to okay, and then started worshiping other gods partway through his rule. So the trend has been going upward. But we'll have to see what happens in this chapter, because that doesn't necessarily mean that things will continue trending that way. So here we go. 2 Chronicles 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Same amount of time as his father. Anyway, he did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel. He cast metal images for the worship of Baal. He offered sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom, even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. Now, if you're not caught up on 2 Chronicles, you might be like, wait, there's this king Ahaz, but then there's a separate king of Israel? Yes. After Solomon, there was a split, with Judah and Benjamin essentially being one kingdom under one king, that was Solomon's son. But the rest of the tribes broke off, formed their own kingdom, because they didn't want to continue working hard and being heavily taxed. And those other tribes turned away from God real quick. Of course, Jerusalem, being in Judah, had the temple, so, there were more built-in influences for them to continue worshiping God. But Ahaz is not following that example. He's acting like the kings of the other tribes did. Sacrificing to other gods, making images / idols for them, and it says even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. Let's read the note there. Could be read as even making his sons pass through the fire. Now that definitely doesn't sound as harsh, but either way, it was a ritual from another people group who worshipped another god. Therefore, it was still bad in God's eyes. So, that I mentioned things were trending upward, and they're back down now. As far as dedication to God. So, yeah. I guess we'll continue on with verse 5 after I get a little sip of water here. Because of all this, the Lord his God allowed the king of Aram to defeat Ahaz and to exile large numbers of his people to Damascus. The armies of the king of Israel also defeated Ahaz and inflicted many casualties on his army. In a single day, Pekah, son of Remaliah, Israel's king, killed 120,000 of Judah's troops, all of them experienced warriors, because they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Then Zikri, a warrior from Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, Azrikam, the king's palace commander, and Elkanah, the king's second in command. The armies of Israel captured 200,000 women and children from Judah and seized tremendous amounts of plunder, which they took back to Samaria. But a prophet of the Lord named Oded was there in Samaria when the army of Israel returned home. He went out to meet them and said, "The Lord, the God of your ancestors, was angry with Judah and let you defeat them. But you have gone too far, killing them without mercy, and all heaven is disturbed. And now you are planning to make slaves of these people from Judah and Jerusalem. What about your own sins against the Lord your God? Listen to me and return these prisoners you have taken, for they are your own relatives. Watch out, because now the Lord's fierce anger has been turned against you." I assume there was a bit of an emphasis on the word "you" there, distinguishing that, alright, yes, it was against Judah before, but now it's turning more so towards you yourselves, Israel. So, yeah, lots of casualties, big losses for Judah, but I guess thanks to Oded, they might have actually gotten to, keep all or most of the people who survived. The phrase "two wrongs doesn't make a right" is coming to mind right here. I'm not necessarily saying that, Israel's actions are a reaction to Judah, but, as Oded says, if they're not careful, God's gonna make things worse for them in Israel. And yeah, these people really were all of the same general lineage. Now, I mean, a bunch of generations had passed since the kingdoms split at this point, but they still could all trace their ancestry back to Jacob in some way. So, yeah, there's been times when some of God's people have taken over another nation or kingdom or something like that, and in those cases there was less strictness within God's laws about what they could do to the people with their goods and things like that. But I will say they generally weren't supposed to keep a lot. However, there were specific commands, laws even, that had been told to their ancestors regarding, relatives. And this was breaking those commands. So, after this word from the prophet Oded, we get to verse 12. Then some of the leaders of Israel, Azariah, son of Jehohanan, Berechiah, son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah, son of Shallum, and Amasa, son of Hadlai, agreed with this and confronted the men returning from battle. "You must not bring the prisoners here," they declared. "We cannot afford to add to our sins and guilt. Our guilt is already great, and the Lord's fierce anger is already turned against Israel." So the warriors released the prisoners and handed over the plunder in the sight of the leaders and all of the people. Then the 4 men just mentioned by name came forward and distributed clothes from the plunder to the prisoners who were naked. They provided clothing and sandals to wear, gave them enough food and drink, and dressed their wounds with olive oil. They put those who were weak on donkeys and took all the prisoners back to their own people in Jericho, the city of palms. Then they returned to Samaria. So ultimately, the leadership of Israel go along with what Oded said. And, if they wanted the people to even really have a reasonable chance of getting back, it's like, okay, well, we got to make sure that you're fed and protected from the elements a bit. And so, yeah. Note here where it says the leaders of Israel. Hebrews says Ephraim, referring to the northern kingdom of Israel. Interesting. I guess, at least in some cases, that was what the other kingdom was called. In the Hebrew was Ephraim. That was one of the tribes that was within that kingdom, so just like the southern kingdom kind of just got called Judah, even though there was also the tribe of Benjamin within that kingdom. I guess the other tribes eventually decided on one that would kind of be more their representative. I don't know. Or that could just be where the common entrance was going from Judah to the other tribes. Samaria might have been within Ephraim, so if that's their capital, it kind of makes sense that they would lean towards that as the standout tribe. But don't quote me on that. Feel free to look it up yourself and let me know if I'm wrong. People from Judah are returned. Now it says back to their own people in Jericho. I mean, I guess Jericho was still within that kingdom. It wasn't necessarily the capital city, but I mean, not all of them would have been from Jerusalem in all likelihood. Anyway, okay. So after they all return, we get to verse 16. At that time, King Ahaz of Judah asked the king of Assyria for help. The armies of Edom had again invaded Judah and taken captives, and the Philistines had raided towns located in the foothills of Judah and in the Negev of Judah. They had already captured and occupied Beth-Shemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages. The Lord was humbling Judah because of King Ahaz of Judah, for he had encouraged his people to sin and had been utterly unfaithful to the Lord. Yep, that pretty much summarizes why all this was happening to them. The guy who's supposed to be the main leader of the people isn't following God. So the other people A, are more likely to follow suit, and B, also end up caught up in the consequences, including even more invasions, more losses, and yeah, again, like, things go up, 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 up for God's people, and then poof. Sharp downturn. That's pretty much just a common thread that you're going to see all throughout the Bible, especially the Old Testament. So, a couple of notes here to look at. In verse 18, he mentions the foothills of Judah. Hebrew says the Shephelah. That was probably the name that was given to it, but the foothills is kind of the geographical area that was. Someone thinking it's a smart idea to turn away from God, right? Yeah. And it only happens, what, like 200 times in the Old Testament? Okay, so there's another note down in verse 19 talking about God humbling Judah because of King Ahaz. Masoretic text reads of Israel, not of Judah. It also appears in verses in verses 23 and 27 of this chapter. The author of Chronicles sees Judah as representative of the true Israel, and that's why it says Israel here potentially instead of Judah in the one source text manuscript thing. When will we ever learn? Oh, right, never. At least not until there's a new heaven and new earth. So, Ahaz continues to be unfaithful. More losses for Judah. Then we get to verse 20. So when King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria arrived, he attacked Ahaz instead of helping him. Ahaz took valuable items from the Lord's temple, the royal palace, and from the homes of his officials, and gave them to the king of Assyria as tribute. But this did not help him. Even during this time of trouble, King Ahaz continued to reject the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus, who had defeated him, for he said, "Since these gods helped the kings of Aram, they will help me too if I sacrifice to them." But instead, they led to his ruin and the ruin of all Judah. The king took the various articles from the temple of God and broke them into pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple so that no one could worship there, and he set up altars and pagan gods in every corner of Jerusalem. He made pagan shrines in all the towns of Judah for offering sacrifices to other gods. In this way, he aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. The rest of the events of Ahaz's reign and everything he did from beginning to end are recorded in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. When Ahaz died, he was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the royal cemetery of the kings of Judah. Then his son Hezekiah became the next king. And another thought stemming from Seth's most recent comment. Lest we think that we are so much better, like, we have our own hang-ups. None of us are perfect. So, that's why it mentions, I want to say in Romans, that there is none righteous, no, not one. None of us by our own merits would deserve eternity in heaven with God. But, kind of as I mentioned in the previous chapter and the discussion there, like, we don't necessarily need to worry about every single little imperfection in our lives sending us to hell. We need to recognize those things and take them to God, apologize, repent, try to do better, continue growing the relationship with God. And then, hopefully our behavior will fall into place. Still not perfectly, but slowly better over time. If we think we're perfect, then we lied right there. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Alright, so the king of Assyria attacks Judah instead of helping, despite Ahaz asking for help because of the other people attacking. Note there's Hebrew says Tilgath Pilneser, which is considered a variant spelling, like similar enough. A couple of letters swapped, and there's an N added in there. But despite all this trouble, Ahaz continues to deny that his worship of other gods has anything to do with it. Or at least, he sure doesn't act like that has anything to do with it. So, they continue having problems. And not only does he worship other gods, he closed up the temple. So, basically, nobody could really worship the Lord their God the way they were supposed to. Like, there might have been some other places where regular offerings were made and, you know, priests could minister to the everyday situations, but there were supposed to be these big festivals and ceremonies and things like that that happened on an annual basis at the temple. If it's closed, nothing's happening there. So, yeah. And of course, he goes on to set up all these other altars and shrines and things like that to pagan gods, further plunging Judah into deviance from worshiping God. All right. And likely because of that, when Ahaz is buried, he's not buried in the royal cemetery like his father was. Or even kind of like his grandfather, although the leprosy had him in maybe a separate little corner. But in any case, yeah. Sharp downturn once again in the morality and the all-around worshiping of the Lord within Judah. It takes so little time to ruin what has been built up over years, decades, or even lifetimes. So that is definitely something to watch out for in our own lives, even, and the lives of those around us, potentially. But that's kind of all the more I have to say on 2 Chronicles 28. So, yeah, once again, just the moral composition of Judah tanked horridly. And, I mean, really, most of the rest of Judah was kind of like that to begin with, even aside from the king, even with the past few kings who were generally pretty good. But now the king is also just flat out not worshiping God, not doing things that he wants. And so the entire kingdom suffers the consequences. Because maybe in some ways the past few kings were the only ones keeping God's wrath away a little bit. But anywho, lest I go on a tangent about that and get into stuff that I'm not really 100% sure is actually true, let me wrap this up. So as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages, Discord server, supporter page, anything you might want to keep up with my activity and engage and support and all that kind of stuff. And of course, down below the description, leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video, but whatever the case is, until next time, stay cool, people.